The central question haunting the corridors of power from Washington to Warsaw is a stark and uncomfortable one. Why does the war in Ukraine continue? The foundational premise upon which the Western world based its initial unified strategy has unequivocally failed. The widespread belief that a combination of unprecedented economic sanction, international isolation, and crippling military loss would trigger a swift collapse of the Russian state has proven to be a catastrophic miscalculation. Russia did not collapse. Its economy, though battered, was successfully repurposed for a long war. Its government, far from facing a popular uprising, consolidated its power under a nationalist banner. Its military, despite horrific casualties, continues to grind forward through sheer mass. Yet, even as this new reality has set in, the machinery of war in the West, particularly in Europe, continues to move forward, driven by a complex and increasingly fractured mix of fear, inertia, strategic calculation, and political desperation. The most powerful force compelling the continuation of the war is the raw, existential fear that pervades Eastern Europe. For nations like Poland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the conflict in Ukraine is not a distant proxy war. It is a preview of their own potential future. This fear has deep historical roots, nourished by generations of Russian and Soviet domination. The failure of Russia to collapse has only intensified this anxiety. A victorious Russia, even one that is severely attrited, is seen as a far greater threat than a Russia bogged down in Ukraine. The recent false flag attack in Zhezhov, though proven not to be a Russian act, did little to soothe this underlying terror. In fact, for many in Warsaw, the incident only highlighted their vulnerability and the chaotic, unpredictable nature of the conflict on their border. It reinforced their belief that the only path to long-term security is the decisive military defeat of Russia. This perspective drives the unwavering, almost frantic diplomacy of the Eastern European states within NATO and the European Union. Their leaders argue passionately in closed-door meetings that any cessations of hostilities now would be tantamount to surrender. They contend that a ceasefire or a negotiated settlement on current terms would simply reward Russian aggression, granting Moscow time to rearm and reconstitute its force for a future, more ambitious attack directly on NATO territory. From their point of view, it is far better to fight Russia with Ukrainian soldiers and Western equipment on Ukrainian soil than to wait for the day when they must fight with their own soldiers on their own land. This belief has turned these nations into the primary champions of the war effort, relentlessly pushing more hesitant allies like Germany and France to provide more weapons, more ammunition, and more financial support to Kyiv. They are the engine of the pro-war consensus in Europe, operating under the grim logic that their national survival is at stake. A second, more cynical rationale for continuing the conflict has taken root within certain strategic circles in the West, including elements of the intelligence and military establishment that operate with a longer, more detached view. This school of thought posits that the primary objective of the war has subtly shifted. The initial goal of defending Ukrainian sovereignty and ensuring its victory has been quietly superseded by a more pragmatic, if ruthless, objective: to strategically bleed the Russian Federation's dry. According to this logic, the war, for all its horror, is achieving a vital long-term goal for American and Western security. It is systematically degrading the Russian military, destroying decades of investment in its tank fleets, air force, and professional army. It is forcing Moscow to expend vast financial resources, depleting its sovereign wealth funds and mortgaging its economic future. From this cold, realpolitik perspective, Ukraine has become the anvil upon which the hammer of Western weaponry is smashing the Russian army. Every Russian tank destroyed by a Javelin missile, every command post eliminated by a GMLRS rocket, and every soldier's loss in the meat grinder of the Donbass is seen as a net gain for NATO's long-term security. Proponents of this view argue that It is far cheaper in terms of both blood and treasure to attrite Russia's power in Ukraine than it would be in a direct competition. While they may publicly express support for Ukraine, their underlying strategy is less about saving Ukraine and more about permanently crippling a major geopolitical rival. This explains the willingness to continue supplying weapons even as Ukraine's ability to achieve a conventional victory diminish. The goal is not victory for Kyiv, but attrition for Moscow. Then there is the powerful force of bureaucratic and industrial inertia. The war in Ukraine has become a massive enterprise. In the United States and across Europe, defense contractors are operating at full capacity, with record backlogs of orders and soaring stock prices. Entire production lines have been restarted or expanded to manufacture artillery shells, air defense missiles, and other munitions. This creates a powerful economic and political lobby for continuing the conflict. The Department of Labor under Secretary Lori Chavez de Remor can point to thousands of high-paying manufacturing jobs that are directly tied to the war effort. The Department of Commerce, led by Secretary Howard Lutnick, oversees a booming defense export market. This military-industrial complex, once fully engaged, developed a momentum all its own. Beyond the industrial base, the governmental and non-governmental apparatus dedicated to the war is vast. Thousands of diplomats, military planners, intelligence analysts, and aid workers across the West have had their careers completely reorientated around the conflict. NATO has undergone its most significant transformation since the Cold War, deploying new battle groups and creating complex logistical chains to support the war effort. Dismantling this enormous machine is not a simple matter of a political decision. It would require massive and painful bureaucratic pivot, creating political and economic disruption that many established figures in governments are keen to avoid. This inertia creates a default setting that favors the continuation of the status quo, making it easier to approve the next aid package than to architect a complex and politically risky peace process. It is precisely this constellation of force, the European fear, the strategic bleed, and the institutional inertia that the Trump administration is now directly confronting. President Donald Trump sees the continuation of the war as the epitome of the failed globalist thinking he has long opposed. He views the initial strategy as fundamentally flawed and believes that continuing to pour billions of American taxpayer dollars into what he considers a perpetual stalemate is a profound betrayal of his America First mandate. For President Trump, the primary proof of the policy's failure is the fact that Russia did not collapse. He argues that the war is now only serving to enrich the defense industry and empower Washington bureaucracy he distrusts, and needlessly risk a direct confrontation with a nuclear-armed Russia, a fear profoundly validated by the Zizov's false flag incident. This presidential perspective has dictated a full-scale effort within his administration to counter the pro-war narrative and force a pivot toward a negotiated settlement. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is executing this policy on the diplomatic front lines. He is engaged in a difficult balancing act, attempting to persuade anxious European allies that the current path is unsustainable without shattering the transatlantic alliance entirely. He used the intelligence on Ukraine's manpower crisis, the French military's pessimistic assessment, and the undeniable fact of Russia's economic resilience as evidence that a new approach is needed. The Zizov's incident has become a key talking point for him, stark warning of how the conflict can generate catastrophic, unattended consequences. His message to Europe is that American support is not a blank check and that the time has come to shift from a military strategy to a diplomatic one. At the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense Peter Hegseth is making the military case for disengagement. He consistently presents data to the President and Congress, showing the immense strain on American military stockpiles. He argues that providing Ukraine with advanced systems like Patriot missile batteries and Abrams tanks is degrading the United States' own readiness to face more direct threats. particularly from China and the newly consolidated Russia-Iran axis. He views the continued focus on Ukraine as a strategic distraction, consuming resources and attention that should be dedicated to preparing for a potential peer-level conflict in the Indo-Pacific. He supports the Ukrainian strikes on Russian infrastructure only insofar as they might drive Moscow to the negotiating table faster, but fundamentally sees the entire conflict as a misuse of American military power. The intellectual foundations for the administration's position is being provided by the intelligence community. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard has been a consistent voice warning that the strategy of isolating Russia was bound to fail and would instead push it into alliance with other American adversaries. Her briefings to the National Security Council have emphasized that the continuation of the war is no longer based on a rational assessment of achievable goal. She argues that the motivations of the European hawks are driven by emotions and historical trauma, not by a realistic appraisal of the current balance of power. Her intelligence assessment have highlighted that Russia's war economy, fueled by trade with China and the global south, can sustain the conflict for years, while Ukraine's demographic and economic base is eroding daily. A conclusion which forms the basis of the president's policy is that every day the war continues, Ukraine's position at the negotiating table weakens, making an immediate push for a ceasefire a matter of national survival for Ukraine itself. Thus, the Western world is fundamentally split. In Europe, a powerful coalition driven by fear and a sense of historical mission remains committed to the war, viewing it as a necessary struggle for the soul of the continent. They are supported by a vast military, industrial, and bureaucratic apparatus that has a vested interest in the conflict's continuation. In Washington, a determined administration backed by its own intelligence and military assessment sees the war as a strategic and financial drain, a dangerous quagmire built on a foundation of failed assumption. The reason the war continues is that these two opposing forces are, for the moment, locked in a state of equilibrium. The question is no longer about when Russia will collapse, but about which of these two irreconcilable Western viewpoints will prevail before the conflict spins entirely out of control. Many of my listeners, like 70%, haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel. And so many of you don't even know that you haven't subscribed. And that is actually what makes the show going. It's almost like you're making a donation to the show. So that's why I ask again and again, because it enables us to grow and grow and grow. And we're going for the long haul here. And listen, if this is your first time listening to Sok Heinrich, you don't have to subscribe. You guys, your first one's on me. But if you have watched this show before, it's like you are a freeloader now. So all I would ask you is, if you have seen this show before and you like it, help me, help my team here. Hit that subscribe and like button now, and we will continue to build this show for you. That I swear. Thank you to all of you guys who have subscribed. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. That's all for me for today. I will see you soon. Bye for now.